Here are the real 5 tips to understanding if you have got a good professional fit with a therapist or a psychologist. Number 1, chemistry. So chemistry is everything. You need to ask yourself, do I feel safe enough to talk about how I really feel around this person? Nothing else matters unless the answer to that question is yes. They could have all the degrees on the wall. They could become highly recommended from a friend or family member. Whatever it is, they might be the best person in that particular field. But unless you feel safe, nothing will get done. Because you won't be able to get to the core wound that needs to be healed. You'll just continually barrier that up. So, if someone says, how do I know I'm with the right person or what's the right fit? I always just say, do you feel safe? Do you feel comfortable? Can you truly open up and get to the hard stuff? If the answer is yes, then you're on to a 90% fit match. And why that is important is because they've done studies on psychotherapy at why does psychology work? And for the most part, and this isn't saying broad brush every single time, but for the most part, therapy works because of the quality of the relationship formed between patient and clinician, not because of the intervention used. So it didn't matter or won't matter whether you do cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, or what intervention type is used. It matters more around how good the connection is between the two people. So it's the alliance, it's the actual relationship and sense of safety and understanding that gets someone better, not necessarily the subject matter expertise in which you use to get there. That is why connection is so key. Safety, trust, understanding, those are the qualities we look for in fit, in psychologist matching, more than anything else. So are you chemically compatible? Should be the number 1 question you ask yourself time and time again. And that may take time to figure out. You might not know that at the end of the first session or third session. You should give every person at least 3 sessions before you go, is this actually a good fit? And often that will come with time, just like any good relationship. You won't know that for a while. And for me, what really allowed me to know that when I finally found that good match, was I knew that I was walking into a absolute bombshell. As in, I was walking into emotional Armageddon every time I was going to have a therapy appointment, but I looked forward to that. So in a situation where I would usually be I don't even want to go anywhere near that, I looked forward to it because I was she's going to be one of the only people I know that can hold me in a way that I need to be held through that. So if you're looking forward to seeing your psychologist, even if you're going to get into the hard nitty gritty stuff, that's a really good sign. Because you're if I'm going to go there, it's going to be with you. And something my therapist said to me was, Mitch, I'm going to hold you afloat until you can swim on your own. And that sentence summarizes a lot for me. It was trust. It wasn't an abandonment. It wasn't being over-involved. She wasn't trying to do it for me. I still had to do all the work, but it was that patient, nurturing arm, almost like floaties, that I just so needed to hear. And when she said that, I was like, all right, this is the right person to be doing this work. I'm going to hold you afloat until you can swim on your own. And those words have stuck with me for so long. Number 2, speciality. So if you're going through an eating disorder, for example, it's worthwhile finding someone who has experience in eating disorders. If you think about other dimensions of medicine, so say, for example, physical health, you've got someone who works in oncology, which is just for cancer treatment. You've got someone who's an orthopedic doctor who just looks at joints in, feet and knees, etc. You've got an ear, nose, and throat surgeon. So we literally divide up the physical body into tiny parts, and a doctor is a doctor of that part. When it comes to psychology, we don't do that. We look at the brain or the mind as a whole thing, where I personally don't believe that's the right way to go. I think that you should specialize in anxiety or depression or PTSD, which a lot of people do, but because psychologists are quite general, and that's okay because there are underlying principles that tie the mind together. But the downside of that is that you don't fully get to understand a certain subject matter expertise. And I think sometimes psychologists want more clientele, so they say that they can do more things when it might not be their area of expertise. So this doesn't counter act, and it's not counterintuitive to my previous point, which is safety and compatibility is more important than speciality. I totally agree. I back that. But they're not mutually exclusive. You can have safety, awesome, this guy gets me or this girl gets me, and then you can filter that with, are they also really good in this field? So, for example, I spent my entire life trying to find, on the rare occasions that I actually did want to see professionals, because I've had an aversion to them since I was 7, because I had a really bad experience. On the odd occasions that I would try and find a professional, I would search for an anxiety specialist, because that's what I thought that I had, because I refused to believe that I was crazy, in inverted commas, and had anything more. Now, the moment that I shifted that and looked at someone who specialized in depersonalization and dissociation and trauma, that's when I started to get somewhere. So that speciality shift was a big thing for me. And it took a lot of ego to be like, no, I just have anxiety. To be like, no, actually, maybe I have something more going on. That took 20 years to swallow that and accept that. And when I did, and as hard as that was, it was the most important decision in my professional help journey that I've ever made. So number 2 is look at their speciality. Try and find someone who has experience in your specific diagnosis. If you don't have a diagnosis yet, I encourage people to get diagnoses, because I think it helps get focused on, it's just kind of like a puzzle piece and makes things make more sense, and you can get more guided and intentional around how you approach your healing. But even if you don't have a diagnosis, or even if you don't feel like you want one, that's okay. Go towards someone who has experience in your situation, or at least the emotion that you're going through. Also, the last point on speciality is, and again, this is my personal opinion, so you should do what's right for you, but my personal opinion is people who have not just a speciality in a certain diagnosis or experience, but people who use mindful approaches, so someone who uses mindfulness in both the way that they talk to you and the way that they treat you, I think is really, really effective. I like psychologists or counselors who have an attachment background. I think a lot of trauma and suffering and mental illness comes from parental figure breakdowns, or at least close relationship breakdowns from childhood. So I think people who have experience in attachment psychology, super important. People who also use a trauma-informed approach, because I think a lot of suffering comes from unhealed trauma. Very, very important. Psychologists who are open to working in partnership within a team. So if they are open to talking to both your GP and or your psychiatrist, if you have one, so that you feel like there is a group of people who are all on the same page with both medication and therapy and blah, blah, blah. So I think it's great when they're open to doing that. Someone who welcomes conflict, so if there's a breakdown in the relationship between you and the therapist, like you're like, you just charged me too much, or that timing went over, or I don't feel like you understood me just then. If a psychologist handles that conflict, that interpersonal conflict well, that's actually part of the therapy. You might think that it's outside the therapy. It's hugely part of it, because what that relationship is bringing up between you is actually reflecting things that need to be healed inside you. And if the therapist leans into that and is good at resolving conflict and holds space for your concerns, but then holds their own boundaries and tries to create a healthy dialogue, the way that they manage conflict will tell you a lot about the way that they do their therapy. So that's another pointer, or just like a sub point under speciality. I like people who kind of on that mindful lens. I'm a big fan of acceptance and commitment therapy. I think when you use acceptance and commitment therapy along with cognitive behavioral therapy, it really helps, because I don't think you can change a mindset until you accept the current one. So psychologists who use, if ever you're doing anxiety work and you're going through exposure or you're looking at some hard stuff, if a therapist is coming in with an acceptance lens, even a Buddhist lens, because they're like hyper exception, I find that really, really good, because it dissolves the shame and it dissolves the barrier and the ego that's getting you in the way of actually moving through an old story into a new one. Now, some of that, what I just said, might sound like complete technical jargon and rubbish. That's okay. Roll it up into a little ball, put it in the bin. Don't worry. All you need to take out from that is, number 1, compatibility is everything. Number 2, try if you can to look at, do they specialize in the exact thing that you're going through? Number 3, practicality. So is it practical for you to go and see them on an ongoing basis, i.e. location? Are they near you? Or do they offer telehealth through video conferencing or phone calls or whatever? So can I make this sustainable? Also, if you're a working professional and you know that you can only meet at lunchtime on a Tuesday, do they have those types of appointments available? Because they might be the best fit in the world and you might feel safe and they might be specialists, but unless you can actually go see them, then there's no point. And kind of affordability is the fourth tip to understanding professional fit. So outside of practicality, there's affordability. Can you see them ongoing? What rates do they offer? You might be willing to dish out a bit more because it's the right fit. And that's something that I've done previously. I'm like, no, this is the right fit. I'm willing to invest in it. And really along this affordability track, I want you to look at it like an investment. Like you are buying an asset, like you're buying a financial stock or a piece of property. Your brain is your biggest financial asset, emotional asset, social asset. Look at that affordability as an investment. It will pay future ROI. Don't look at it as an expense. And the last one is format. So do you want to do weekly drop-in visits to a psychologist's office, or should you go into what's called an outpatient program? So I did an outpatient program, which was an intensive 2-week long program for my OCD, which I needed. Dropping in and having therapy from time to time wasn't enough. I was just on the borderline of needing inpatient treatment, which is where I needed to be admitted to a mental health hospital. I was so close to that, which is another type of format that you might need. You might need some inpatient help, and that's okay. Check out my podcast with Ruby Wax, who's a professional comedian, on the Heart on My Sleeve podcast, where she tells her story. She's a very famous person. And the hospital, her mental health ward, is actually her safe place. It's her happiest place in the world. She's like, this is my people. This is my tribe. When she got awarded a medal by the Queen, and she did the ceremony at her mental health ward because she wanted to feel around her people. Amazing person. So outpatient is between inpatient and weekly or monthly office visits. So have a think about the format around how intensive do I need this treatment to be, and let the GPs and the medical people in your world guide that experience. Now, so the 5 tips to understanding professional help: chemistry, speciality, practicality, affordability, and format. They're the things you want to look out for. And as I said before, those 5 things, you want to look at how you get there in the first place. So are you going straight to your GP? Are you searching online yourself, or are you getting a referral from a friend? Really look at the things that are stopping you from getting professional help, whether it's time, money, awkwardness, bad previous experiences. And I think for most people, all right, so that's this week's segment on 5 tips to understanding getting the right professional help.